Hello, I'm Dilek Tuna and you're watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. Ukrainian, Russian and US delegations meet in Geneva as President Volodymyr Zelensky warns of possible new Russian attacks. At least 3 dead and 3 critically injured in Rhode Island high school hockey game shooting. And ahead of US-Iran nuclear talks in Geneva, President Donald Trump says he will be involved indirectly. Ukrainian, Russian and American delegations are due to meet in Geneva on Tuesday and Wednesday. Talks come as US President Donald Trump seeks to push through a deal to end Europe's biggest war since 1945.
The United States, Ukraine and Russia are set to meet in Geneva on Tuesday for talks aimed at ending Russia's war in Ukraine. The two-day discussions follow 2 earlier rounds of trilateral talks held in Abu Dhabi in January and at the start of this month. Envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner will represent the United States, while the Kremlin said aide Vladimir Medinsky will lead the Russian delegation. Medinsky, who headed Russia's team during previous negotiations in Turkey in 2022 and again last year, is returning to the role. It's a move that could indicate Moscow expects discussions to expand beyond security concerns to wider areas of dispute. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian delegation will be led by Rustem Umerov, head of the National Security and Defense Council. The announcement comes as President Volodymyr Zelensky expressed hope that US-brokered peace efforts would be serious and substantive, while warning that Ukraine was too often being asked to make concessions. He called on Ukraine's allies to take stronger action, including imposing additional sanctions on Russia and maintaining weapons supplies to ensure Moscow engages meaningfully in negotiations. Nearly 4 years into the conflict, and despite sustained efforts by US President Donald Trump to end what he has described as a senseless bloodbath, the two sides remain divided on key issues, including territorial control. Zelensky has rejected proposals involving the exchange of Ukrainian territory as part of any settlement, saying such a move would affect the livelihoods of around 200,000 people living in the areas concerned. The latest talks mark a continued diplomatic push to de-escalate Europe's deadliest conflict since the Second World War.
And whether or not these talks materialise into the end of the war is what many are hoping for. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Monday that Ukrainian intelligence indicates that further Russian attacks on energy targets were likely. He warned that this would make it more difficult to reach an agreement to end the nearly 4-year war. However, US President Donald Trump said peace talks will be very easy. Speaking in his nightly video address on the eve of new talks in Geneva with Russian and US officials, Zelensky said Moscow's attacks were evolving and involved a combination of weapons and required specialized air defenses.
Everything we discussed with partners in Munich must be implemented promptly. It is important that partners do not remain silent. Everyone is now awaiting the continuation of trilateral meetings. Our delegation is already in Geneva and preparing for negotiations. Russia cannot resist the temptation of the final days of winter cold and wants to strike Ukrainians painfully. The more evil comes from Russia, the harder it will be to reach any agreements with them. Partners must understand this. First and foremost, this concerns the United States. Soon we will mark a year of Ukraine's most active diplomacy. We agreed to all realistic proposals from America, starting with the proposal for an unconditional and long-term ceasefire. Russia rejects this, continues assaults at the front, and strikes on our cities and energy infrastructure. We expect partners to act so that forcing the aggressor to peace truly works.
Ukraine talks tomorrow as well in Geneva with Witkoff and Jared Kushner. What are you expecting there? Is there
big talks? It's going to be very easy. I mean, look, so far, Ukraine better come to the table fast. That's all I'm telling you. We are in a position, we want them to come in. By the way,
Germany is looking to increase its defence capabilities as it says it is in talks with France on joint nuclear deterrence. This comes as it faces mounting pressure to invest in new defence technologies such as drones and autonomous systems. Anita Sharma brings us more from the Netherlands.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where Germany admits it's in early stage talks with France on joint nuclear deterrence. Berlin says the dialogue with Paris is exploratory and designed to strengthen, not replace the U.S. nuclear umbrella that underpins NATO's collective defense. But the conversation is not just about Europe's nuclear theory or formal policy frameworks, it's about real-world military capabilities. At the recent Munich Security Conference, German defense officials faced mounting criticism over how hundreds of billions of euros in new rearmament funds are being spent, disproportionately on conventional tanks, jets, and warships, and far less on emerging technologies such as drones and autonomous systems. Defense Minister Boris Pistorius insisted Germany will invest more in innovation and work more closely with startups and cutting-edge firms. Well, last week, the Wall Street Journal reported that, quote, NATO has seen the future and is unprepared. It published details of a major NATO exercise from last May in Estonia that brought together more than 16,000 troops from 12 NATO countries to train with Ukrainian drone experts and simulate a contested and congested battlefield. Tallinn said the goal of Hedgehog 2025 was to create friction and cognitive overload, testing how units adapt under constant drone pressure. But in one scenario, a British-Estonian battle group advanced without fully accounting for battlefield transparency created by drones. Role-playing adversaries said the unit moved in the open and was swiftly wiped out. Meantime, Ukrainians deployed their sophisticated AI-enabled Delta battlefield system that enabled a rapid, quote, see it, share it, shoot it, kill chain. Within hours, a small Ukrainian team mock-destroyed 17 armored vehicles and carried out 30 simulated strikes. That devastating result reflects unease from Tallinn to Berlin about whether the alliance is truly fit for a security environment shaped more by drones than tanks and other armored vehicles. In Munich, analysts warned that up to 95% of Germany's post-2022 defense spending has gone into legacy systems, crowding out the disruptive technologies NATO says it needs. As Europe debates deterrence and readiness, the real question is whether it can adapt in time for tomorrow's threats. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
A high school ice hockey game in Rhode Island tragically ended with at least 3 people dead on Monday. It's after a shooting incident which authorities believe stemmed from a family dispute. Authorities now say they've identified the suspect.
At least 3 people have died and 3 others left in critical condition following a mass shooting at a high school ice hockey game in Rhode Island on Monday. The incident occurred at Lynch Arena in Pawtucket, an indoor skating rink. Authorities said they have identified the suspect, who also died from an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound, and described the shooting as a targeted incident linked to a family dispute.
So what I can say right now that we have identified the person, the suspect, by a birth name. The birth name was Robert Dorgan. We have also learned that the person does go by the name of Roberta, also uses a last name of Esposito. But again, that will be all confirmed throughout the course of the investigation as to their status that really doesn't have anything to do with the investigation.
Local media reported that the gunman, identified as the father of a North Providence High School senior, shot 5 members of the student's family. According to the reports, the student's mother was killed at the rink and a sibling later died in hospital. Eyewitnesses described scenes of panic, which involved around 13 shots being fired in rapid succession over 6 seconds, prompting spectators and student athletes to drop to the floor for cover.
Many were hugging their parents, rightfully so, and you could see some of the parents watching the players kind of roam and could feel and ask them, how are you doing? And you could see the tears starting to come down and the parents hugging their kids. And I'm sure they're thanking God that they weren't the victim of the shooting and they're still alive with them today.
In a post on social media, FBI Director Kash Patel said agents had been deployed to assist with the investigation. Pawtucket, located just north of Providence near the Massachusetts state border, has a population of around 75,000 and is the fourth largest city in Rhode Island. The shooting comes roughly 2 months after a separate attack at Brown University, a few miles south of Pawtucket, in which 2 students were killed, 9 others wounded, and a days-long manhunt launched across the state.
As US and Iranian officials prepare for critical nuclear talks in Geneva, President Donald Trump says he will be involved indirectly and believes Tehran wants a deal. Meanwhile, new satellite images and Iran's fresh military drills are raising the stakes in an already tense standoff. Here's more.
Ahead of the US and Iranian officials meeting in Switzerland for a second round of talks on Tuesday over Tehran's nuclear program, President Donald Trump says that he will be involved indirectly in the high-stakes discussions. He believes Iran is willing to make a deal.
No, I'll be involved in those talks indirectly, and they'll be very important. We'll see what can happen. But typically, Iran's a very tough negotiator. They're good negotiators, or bad negotiators. I would say they're bad negotiators because we could have had a deal instead of sending the B-2s in to knock out their nuclear potential, and we had to send the B-2s. I hope they're going to be more reasonable. They want to make a deal.
Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi met with the United Nations nuclear watchdog chief Rafael Grossi on Monday, and he said in a post on X that he was in Geneva to achieve a fair and equitable deal. Meanwhile, satellite imagery has confirmed that the US aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln is operating near Iran. According to the BBC, the carrier is positioned off the coast of Oman, about 700 kilometers from Iranian shores. The Navy ship was deployed to the Gulf region in late January, but hadn't appeared in satellite images until now. Washington has also ordered a second carrier strike group to the Middle East. Additional US warships and aircraft are already in the region. However, on Monday, Iran's Revolutionary Guards Navy carried out military drills in the Strait of Hormuz. State-linked media said the exercise tested readiness against possible security threats. Tehran has repeatedly warned that it might shut the Strait of Hormuz in retaliation for an attack. The narrow waterway handles about 1/5 of the world's oil exports, and closing it would sharply reduce supply and push oil prices much higher. Over in Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said any US deal with Iran must fully dismantle Iran's nuclear infrastructure, not just limit uranium enrichment.
Canada has appointed a new chief trade negotiator to the United States ahead of a key trade review. Prime Minister Mark Carney has appointed veteran public servant Janice Charette to lead preparations for the upcoming review of the Canada-United States-Mexico agreement. Charette, a former clerk of the Privy Council and High Commissioner to the UK, will advise the Prime Minister and work with Canada's ambassador in Washington. French President Emmanuel Macron is due to meet Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi during a visit to Mumbai and New Delhi on Tuesday. The 3-day trip is expected to include Macron's participation in events focused on innovation, artificial intelligence and economic cooperation between the two nations. The visit follows India's decision last week to grant initial approval for a $40 billion boost to its armed forces, including the procurement of additional French-made Rafale fighter jets for the Air Force. Severe storms continue to batter New Zealand, causing flooding, landslides and widespread power outages. Authorities are on high alert as more heavy rain is expected in both the North and South Islands. Here's more.
Heavy rain battered New Zealand's South Island on Tuesday, triggering flooding and forcing the closure of roads and bridges. The storm, which has caused widespread damage in Wellington since the weekend, moved south, bringing further disruption. A local state of emergency was declared on the Banks Peninsula near Christchurch, New Zealand's second largest city. Flooding, fallen trees and landslides have cut communications and power in some communities.
has been happening. It happened last year, not as severely, but this is sort of like flash flood. Last year we were a bit more prepared for it, but yeah, no, it's crazy.
The country's Weather Bureau warned that a low-pressure system off the east coast could bring more heavy rain, causing rivers and streams to rise quickly and increasing the risk of landslides. Earlier, the storm hit large parts of the North Island, where flights were cancelled, major highways closed, and tens of thousands of residents lost power.
China has ushered in the Lunar New Year with its annual Spring Festival Gala, a globally watched television event blending tradition with cutting-edge technology. Festivities were also held across Asia and beyond, including in Manila's historic Chinatown, where large crowds marked the occasion as Beijing signalled openness to renewed talks with the Philippines over the South China Sea.
China has welcomed the Year of the Fire Horse with a spectacular Spring Festival Gala. The 4-hour show themed the Steed Gallops Momentum Unstoppable. This year's gala blended traditional culture with modern innovation, weaving the spirit of the horse, symbolising perseverance and self-improvement throughout the performances. Audiences were treated to stirring songs, elaborate dance routines, opera, comedy sketches and magic acts, alongside high-tech elements including AI-driven stage effects and even AI-embodied robots performing a dynamic kung fu routine. The Spring Festival Gala, first broadcast in 1983 and recognised by Guinness World Records as the world's most watched annual television programme, remains a centrepiece of Lunar New Year celebrations. The festival itself was inscribed on UNESCO's representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity in December 2024. Celebrations extended far beyond mainland China. In Manila, tens of thousands of people flocked to Binondo, widely regarded as the world's oldest Chinatown, to usher in the Year of the Fire Horse. Fireworks painted the night sky in shifting colours as families visited temples, exchanged red envelopes and watched traditional lion dances. And similar scenes played out across Asia and in Chinese communities worldwide.
Now we'll take a short break. When we return, we'll assess whether today's Geneva talks can prevent a new military confrontation between the United States and Iran. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. The United States and Iran are holding a second round of high-stakes nuclear talks in Geneva today, with Tehran's Foreign Minister Sayed Abbas Araghchi leading the Iranian delegation and US envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner representing Washington. The talks come amid warnings from President Trump about serious consequences should diplomacy fail and rising fears of military escalation in the region. Let's bring in our guest to examine what's at stake and whether a breakthrough is realistically within reach. Anna Evans, political analyst, joins us from Lisbon, Portugal. Anna, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Now, let's begin with leverage. Compared to the first round, which side enters this second round in a stronger negotiating position?
Well, the US is in a notoriously advantageous position in these negotiations because the US has military leverage, it has increased naval presence in Syria, it has the sanctions to impose. The US has stricken Iran very recently in June of last year, and military forces from the US have shown that it is very easy for them to enter Iran's airspace and use it as a playground. And so this is obviously from the US side, a very strong position vis-a-vis Iran. Now, Iran also is a bit vulnerable because of the very recent demonstrations, internal and dissent, and because Iran has not been willing, the administration has been willing to play a softer card vis-a-vis the population, and so it has crushed the dissent. So these images of dissent and of some inability of the regime to deal with it without using force, these are images that are very strong at the international level and that also contribute to allow a vulnerable view and perspective with regard to Iran. Furthermore, Syria has fallen, the previous regime in Syria, Assad's regime has fallen. That has changed completely the geopolitics of the Middle East and the capacity by Iran to use Syrian corridors to sponsor its proxies, Hezbollah and Hamas. And so a lot of factors put US in a stronger position at this point.
And Iran insists, Anna, its nuclear program is peaceful. What are the key technical disputes now on the table? Is it enrichment levels, inspections, or sanctions relief sequencing?
Dilek, it's precisely those aspects. So we know that the percentage of uranium enrichment that is needed for civilian purposes is much, much lower than that which is needed for military purposes. And the problem is that as all the informations indicate that previous to the US attacks, the level of enrichment of uranium in Iran was much higher than the needed levels for civilian purposes. Furthermore, the fact that the enrichment facilities are highly guarded, subterranean, and so secured and so hidden from public sight also indicates a level of secrecy that is unusual if a country is just enriching uranium for purposes. So this is, of course, one of the great arguments that the US has been putting on the table, that all the way Iran behaves with regard to the enriching uranium suggests that it is not just for civilian purposes. Furthermore, there is also the issue of the inspections. So the International Energy Agency needs to do inspections to verify that the levels of enrichment are according to the civilian purposes. But of course, we know that there have been zero inspections after the strikes from the US in June of last year. And so the ability of the International Energy Agency to inspect is, again, another big issue. And then there are other issues related to the possibility that Iran has ballistic missiles. That's another topic, but that's a very important topic for Israel. Let's find that Israel is the great party concerned here with the nuclear capacity of Iran, because Israel feels directly threatened if Iran amasses nuclear power in terms of military capacity.
Okay, and I certainly want to come back to Israel, but how much do domestic political pressures in Tehran constrain Araghchi's flexibility at this point?
Well, Araghchi is in a very, very, very hard spot in negotiating terms, because he has severe constraints at the domestic level, and he is very severely constrained at the international level by the US. And so this is not a very nice spot for a negotiator, because Iran is in a vulnerable position at the international level. The US is in a very strong position at this point. But at the same time, Araghchi needs to show his domestic constituencies that the regime is still strong. So, showing regime weakness at this point when so recently the country has had to deal, and it has been, dealing for quite some time with significant unrest and challenges that might risk the regime, is really a problem. Because if Arachi does too many concessions, it cannot show that the regime is still strong. But on the other hand, the fact is that the US is in a very positive position at this point. So it's a very fine line for Arachi how to balance domestic demands and conditionalities and the international vulnerable position of the country.
Now, as far as Washington, the delegation includes figures closely tied to Trump's inner circle. Does that signal tighter White House control over this negotiation?
Oh, definitely, Dilek, definitely. And, let's also place in context that these negotiations are parallel to Ukraine-Russia negotiations, at the same time, in the same forum, which is the Geneva negotiating table. So, Kushner and Witkoff, they are going to negotiate the two settings that are actually strategically aligned from the other end. What do I mean? We know that Russia and Iran play each other to get a better position in negotiating terms, and both Russia and Iran are sitting in Geneva at different tables and negotiating with the two people that Trump trusts more. So Trump is showing that his, inner core circle of the administration is the core circle that really has domain over foreign policy and over the great decisions that shape two regional areas of geopolitics in the near future. And these regions are, of course, Russia and its interests, and Iran and its interests. And the two regions are associated. And so this shows that Trump is having a very strong hand inside the administration's operational, and he prefers to have very, very close people doing the hard bargaining rather than delegating that kind of hard bargaining on the structures of the bureaucratic apparatus. So it shows a very strong hand by the president, and it also shows that the US knows perfectly well that when negotiating with Iran, it needs to negotiate with Russia because Iran uses Russia as a bait, and Russia uses Iran as a bait in negotiations. And they are very well aligned when they are negotiating. So this is really interesting that, that these negotiations are now following this specific model.
And Anna, let's go back to Israel now, who have expressed concern about the trajectory of US-Iran diplomacy. As you touched on earlier, how much does Israeli security policy factor into Washington's calculations?
Oh, Dilek, it factors a lot. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has very recently met with President Trump, and they're meeting constantly, they're talking constantly. And we know that Israel is US best friend in the Middle East. It has been so for a long time. And it's not just an alignment of circumstantial interests. It is a deep and resilient, sustained friendship and, combination of defense and security preoccupations. And so, obviously, Israel is the most interested party but so are Arab Gulf countries. Of course, Arab Gulf countries have a lot to fear from Iran, but Israel is the one critical piece in the Middle East that really must avoid at all costs military capacity that risks its own survival. And Israel has been chastised by Iran for quite a long time. You know, it is obviously part of the Iranian government in the Ayatollah regime to try and wipe out Israel. So Iran has been sponsoring Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthi, you know, all these radical forces that have constantly attacked Israel. And, you know, obviously then the war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. So Iran has had always this unstabilizing factor with regard to Israel. And so now, again, the circumstances are very, and I emphasize this because the fall of Assad's regime in Syria and the reduced capacity by Iran to feed all the equipment and any sort of goods that Hezbollah and Hamas needed using the Syrian corridor, all that has, you know, gone, or at least has been reduced in terms of Iran's capacity. So again, it's a really different context at this stage than it was a couple of years ago. And therefore, again, Israel and the US are in a much better position than they were a couple of years ago or earlier than that.
Okay, Anna, my last question to you. So aside from Israel's concerns with the proxies, let's ask in terms of the nuclear track and the proxies, how does the broader regional context, Gaza tensions, Gulf security, Hezbollah, the dynamic with Hezbollah complicate this nuclear track?
Well, this is the great cleavage between the US and Iran with regard to what is being negotiated. Because we know when we study international relations that a sequence of negotiation and the agenda of the negotiation are really important. So it is very different to negotiate only the issue of nuclear enrichment versus negotiating the whole regional context. It is much more complex to include regional negotiations regarding Iran's proxies and Iran's actions to destabilize the Middle East than it is to negotiate just the technical aspects of the nuclear enrichment. But then again, even the nuclear part has not been successful at all. You know, let's remind that the US attacks in June 2025 were precisely to try and dismantle the nuclear capacity of Iran. And so again, even this specific topic is so complex and has been of such complexity for many years so far. And so, you know, the regional aspect is always present, but Iran has tried until now to always keep that regional negotiation out of the negotiation table, because it is better for Iran to keep its feet only on the nuclear issue. But of course, for Israel and the US, you know, the great goal is to ensure that at the regional level, Iran is severely contained and incapable of destabilizing as it had until, you know, until the fall of the Assad regime.
Anna, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for your analysis and contribution today.
Always a pleasure.
And now, after the break, we'll take a look at the major stories from the region. Welcome back to A News. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. Iran's Revolutionary Guards Navy held a drill in the Hormuz Strait on Monday, a day prior to renewed Iran-US nuclear negotiations. Our correspondent reports from Tehran.
The Navy of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, staged a combined war game codenamed Smart Control of the Strait of Hormuz on Monday in one of the world's most critical energy checkpoints. The Strait of Hormuz, where the drill is held, is a narrow maritime corridor through which a major share of global oil exports transit. Led by IRGC's top commander, Major General Mohammad Pakpour, objectives of the drill include assessing combat readiness of naval units, reviewing contingency and security plans, and rehearsing counter-response. The drills started one day ahead of indirect nuclear negotiations with the U.S. on Tuesday in Geneva. Earlier, Secretary of Supreme National Security Council Ali Larijani said that Iran does not seek war, but it will not bow to U.S. threats, relying on a combination of negotiations and deterrence. In an interview, Larijani said that Iran will target U.S. bases in the region if it is attacked, stressing that Tehran's ballistic missiles capability is not on the agenda of nuclear talks in Geneva. According to Iran's security chief, U.S. demand of zero enrichment makes no sense. Tehran says its nuclear program is solely for civilian purposes and is ready to assuage concerns regarding nuclear weapons by building trust that enrichment is and will stay for peaceful purposes. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi on Monday met Rafael Grossi, head of the International Atomic Energy Agency in Geneva, to discuss cooperation with the IAEA and technical aspects of the impending talks with the United States. Turaj Shiralilu, Tehran, Foreign News.
An Azerbaijani military court has handed a lengthy prison sentence to Armenian national Ruben Vardanyan in a high-profile trial tied to the conflict period. Judges found him guilty of a series of grave offences, including war crimes and terrorism-related charges, following months of proceedings. Our correspondent has the details.
Armenian citizen Ruben Vardanyan has been sentenced to 20 years in prison by the Baku military court in a high-profile criminal case. The court found him guilty on multiple charges under Azerbaijan's criminal code, including crimes against peace and humanity, war crimes, terrorism, and financing terrorism. The verdict was announced after judges completed deliberations following the conclusions of the trial phase earlier this month. Prosecutors had accused Vardanyan of a range of offences, including violations of the laws and customs of war, forced displacement of civilians, and other serious crimes linked to the conflict period. The case is part of a broader legal proceedings concerning alleged crimes connected to the years of armed confrontation. This is Gulshan Khojalieva with Nijat Kasumov for A News.
Earlier, A News Investigations presented a deep dive into how wealth and influence are transformed into political power beyond official institutions. The Oligarch's Design examines the case of Ruben Vardanyan using international reporting and expert insight to map the hidden networks connecting finance and geopolitics.
Ruben Vardanyan.
Mr. Vardanyan, thank you for being with us.
A News original documentary, The Oligarch's Design, explores how power and influence can be built outside formal politics, through financial networks, philanthropy, and carefully shaped public narratives. The documentary tracks Ruben Vardanyan's move from Moscow's financial circles to politics in the unrecognized separatist regime in 2022. Filmed across Italy, Lithuania, the United Kingdom, the United States, Armenia, Israel, Ukraine, and Azerbaijan, the documentary features versatile insights from the experts.
All connections what Ruben Vardanyan has with Russian military-industrial complex will have result that Ruben Vardanyan will be sanctioned in EU, in USA, in the United Kingdom, and other. And exit from Russia's citizenship, it's very good decision for avoid sanction.
The Russian oligarchs are not individual actors. They know that they are captured by the Russian state. The Russian intelligence officers control them. They know that if they don't do what the intelligence officer or what the Kremlin tells them to do, they will either lose their money or they will be killed or they will go to jail.
The investigation is based on open source data and earlier international reports that revealed the Troika Laundromat, a major offshore scheme used to move billions of dollars. The oligarch's design marks the debut of the A News Investigations documentary series.
Millions of Afghans are facing another year with urgent, unfulfilled humanitarian needs, according to the United Nations. A new assessment from UN Habitat has highlighted the scale of the country's shelter crisis, while UNICEF has warned that nearly half the population required aid last year. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has the details from Kabul.
The United Nations Human Settlements Programme, or UN Habitat, says 4.2 million people in Afghanistan are in urgent need of shelter and non-food items this year. The agency shared the figure on its official X account, stressing that adequate housing is the first step toward a stable future, and warning that action to address the crisis cannot be delayed. UN Habitat said proper shelter is essential for stability and called for swift intervention to support vulnerable families. The warning comes as humanitarian needs across the country remain widespread. In its 2025 annual report, the United Nations Children's Fund said 22.9 million people in Afghanistan, nearly half of the population, required humanitarian assistance, including around 12 million children. UNICEF identified climate shocks, economic recession and unemployment, as well as the continued exclusion of women and girls from education and much of the workforce as the main drivers of those needs. Aid agencies have repeatedly warned that declining international funding, combined with economic hardship and climate pressures, is leaving millions of Afghans without basic services, shelter, or food security. With winter conditions, large-scale returns from neighboring countries, and continued funding gaps, humanitarian organizations say the need for shelter and essential support is likely to remain high in the months ahead. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan have agreed to strengthen coordination in managing shared water and energy resources, signing a trilateral protocol aimed at ensuring regional energy stability and sustainable use of transboundary rivers.
Energy ministers of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan discussed the current state and future prospects of cooperation in managing water and energy resources. The talks focused on ensuring the sustainable and balanced operation of the regional power system, particularly during periods of seasonal peak demand. The sides reviewed coordination of generating facilities, compliance with agreed water use parameters, and joint approach to maintaining stable water regimes in transboundary rivers. Ministers emphasized the importance of mutual support and prompt coordination during seasonal loads, noting that agreed water release schedules are essential for both irrigation and hydropower generation across the region. The issue is particularly pressing. According to the Euro-Asian Development Bank, Central Asia could face a significant water deficit by 2028-2029 if current consumption trends continue. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization data shows that Central Asia faces extremely high water stress, with more than 70% of its renewable fresh water withdrawn each year, mostly for irrigation, highlighting pressure on shared water resources. At the conclusion of the meeting, the parties signed a trilateral protocol formalizing the agreements reached, reaffirming their commitment to strengthening the reliability of Central Asia's integrated water energy systems amid climate and resource challenges. It is Sivil Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Now we'll take a short break. When we return, we'll examine the implications of the Baku Military Court's verdict in the case of Ruben Vardanyan. See you shortly. Welcome back to A News. Today, Armenian citizen Ruben Vardanyan has been sentenced to 20 years in prison by the Baku military court in a high-profile criminal case. The court found him guilty on multiple charges under Azerbaijan's criminal code, including crimes against peace and humanity, war crimes, terrorism and financing terrorism. The ruling is expected to draw regional and international attention, raising questions about political implications and its potential impact on ongoing diplomatic dynamics in the South Caucasus. Let's bring in our guest, Parvana Valieva. She's a member of Parliament of Azerbaijan from Baku, Azerbaijan. Parvana, welcome to the program.
Thank you, dear Dilek. Thank you for having me.
Now, let's begin with the legal foundation. What specific charges led to this 20-year sentence, and how does Azerbaijani law define them?
Yes, thank you very much. In the concluding phase by Baku Military Court today, Ruben Vardanyan, a Russian oligarch, money launderer, one of the separatist leaders, the person who is in the sanctioned list of Ukraine, was sentenced to 20 years in jail. It can be accepted as a final step, closing one more dark chapter of Azerbaijani history, while Azerbaijan and Armenia is heading decisively towards achieving lasting peace in South Caucasus. Azerbaijan again remains committed to justice, international law, and regional peace agenda. Azerbaijan exercised its sovereign right to protect its people and territory from unlawful occupation and terrorism in 2023. Those criminals found guilty of serious crimes, including war crimes, crimes against humanity, peace, financing terrorism, and terrorism in our sovereign territories. You know, this junta regime plundered Azerbaijan's natural resources, conducted illegal trade, and used its benefits for terrorism against the Azerbaijani people and Azerbaijan state. I remember also what our civil society called during the protest in Lachin-Khan Kendi Road in 2023 we called for stopping illegal economic activity that was carried out in sovereign territories of Azerbaijan without Azerbaijan's authorization. We raised environmental concerns calling for dialogue with Armenian people in Karabakh, but it remained unresponsive again for Ruben Vardanyan's existence here. Today, Vardanyan faces a broad range of charges under Azerbaijan's criminal code, including alleged crimes against peace, war crimes, terrorism, financing terrorism. Indictment also lists accusations such as planning, waging aggressive war, displacement of people, mercenary activities. You know, the 100,000 of victims were long waited this day. An open trial has been organized, so the entire world and also international human rights organizations can follow it. They have been provided all necessary services with lawyers, with entrepreneurs, and thousands of witnesses have been heard during the process. Irrefutable evidence and facts were collected over 2.5 years of trial. I would like also to note that Azerbaijan showed a big mercy to all war prisoners, releasing them right after the war. Some people during the court process were also pardoned by Azerbaijan government, which demonstrated Azerbaijan's big kindness. But this is our red line.
Okay. Now, some have suggested that Ruben Vardanyan's arrival in Karabakh in 2022 damaged the prospects of the Armenian residents of the region by effectively derailing the emerging dialogue between Baku and the local Armenian population. He was also openly critical of Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, with some observers suggesting that he harbored ambitions for high office in Yerevan. Now, what, Parvana, in historical hindsight, is likely to be his political legacy within the broader peace process?
Yes, you said right. After ending the Armenian occupation of Azerbaijan's sovereign territories, we initiated to start a dialogue with Armenian people in Karabakh, but Ruben Vardanyan and so-called regime interfered to this dialogue. They blocked roads, they surrounded the territories and where Armenian people lived, and they also, Ruben Vardanyan especially, illegally crossed the Azerbaijan state border after 3 years of the war. After 3 years of the war, and Pashinyan also Armenian government, they also did not recognize any separatist authority in the Karabakh region of Azerbaijan. Armenian officially recognized Karabakh as sovereign territory of Azerbaijan. And as you said, we are now going to achieve lasting peace in the region. We continue our confidence building measures, and in Armenia, Azerbaijan, we initiated peace treaty, and this issue is neither as part of our bilateral relations nor in the peace agreement. It's not part of the negotiations. So that's why some international community, especially some European MPs, parliaments, international human rights organizations that refer that Ruben Vardanyan or Arek Harutyunyan or others as prisoners, but they are war criminals. They can follow the open trial. We have witnesses, we have facts that they committed crimes against our country. During this period, no foreign interference or unjust accusations by Western media campaigns, the blackmailing, etc., did not deterred us from upholding the rule of law and holding accountable those people who committed crimes against our country. Azerbaijan has repeatedly brought the crimes committed by Armenia here in Karabakh to the attention of international community and demanded that these separatist leaders to be held accountable. Azerbaijani society also has called for International Criminal Court to investigate these criminals and prosecute those responsibles, but Western political hypocrisy and double standards always ignored and remain silent on this issue.
Okay, one last question for you, Parvana. What reaction should we expect, do you think, from Armenia's political leadership and public opinion?
You know, public opinion, there are still revanchist groups and strong Armenian diaspora that resist, that cannot also accept the Washington Accords. They still continue to damage with these past narratives, outdated narratives, to increase revengeful ideas, feelings within Armenian community. That is also harmful to, I think, fragile peace negotiations. There can be some reactions from Armenian diaspora, even some lobbyists in U.S. Congress or MPs, some European MPs from European Parliament. We always saw these reactions, these double standards towards these people, but they should accept that this is our red line and they are war criminals, they are not prisoners, and Azerbaijan show principality in this issue.
Okay. Parvana, thank you so much for your analysis today. It's a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for having me.
You're up to date with World News for the Hour. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.